Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 179 in the Best Way to Do Cataract Surgery series. This is a 3+ dense lens, but it's also a sticky lens. And you're going to see I'm going to do double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing techniques. And again, for those critics who think this is not safe, you're going to see there's no lens tilt and there's no traction on the zonules. All of the forces are directed towards the center, away from the zonules. And when you have directly opposing forces, you get really nice fracturing of the lens, again, with purely mechanical fracturing forces. So use a cotton tip to steady the eye, and this is a corneal marker, which will help me to center and size the rexus. You can see there's a small pterygium nasally in this patient as well. Using the cotton tip to steady the eye, I turn the eye towards the left to make my paracentesis incision, first on the right side and then the left side, making sure I'm flat to the iris plane, which creates a nice corneal shelf, which will allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. This is intracameral lidocaine and then some intracameral epinephrine, and then some dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium and flatten the anterior capsule. Using the cannula to hold the eye steady, this is a triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove, tunnel through the cornea, and then when I'm ready to enter, I turn the cannula towards me. The cannula gives me great control when I do that maneuver. This is a sharp tip Haldane-Perkar forceps. I go in with the teeth sideways. You can see the sharp tips allow this forceps to act like a cystotome. I'm able to puncture and then pull down towards me, grabbing the right side of the tear now. And again, I made that tear in such a way that it matches the radius of the rexus that I want to achieve as far as size and centration, which again aligns with the corneal mark that I made previously. You can see the low profile rexus. Forceps gives me great control with limited OVD egress. Finish off the rexus, burp some viscoelastic out, and this is the capsular fornix hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, rotate the cannula tip down towards the nerve, get a nice wave, decompress on the left side, sweeping under the rexus edge on the left side, pushing BSS at the same time, doing the same thing on the right side, and the lens begins to spin. Irrigating the surface of the eye, adjusting my sleeve, lifting the incision with a chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma, going in with the chopper as well, removing the surface epinuclear material with the chopper tip leading off. I'm going to slide it under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, turn it vertically, turning the ficcative vertically sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together by having opposing forces. This fractures the lens completely in half. I pronate my hand under the right heminucleus, sliding it under the rexus edge, pulling it centrally toward the ficcative, fracturing the right heminucleus against the ficcative, and that is the cross-chop maneuver, fracturing the right heminucleus completely in half. Using mechanical forces to crush the lens pieces into smaller and smaller pieces, and then emulsifying that first quadrant up. So that was, again, in normal speed. This is in half speed. Again, I'm leading off with the chopper tip, getting under the rexus edge, getting to the equator, again, rotating it vertically now, rotating the ficcative vertically as well. You can see the instruments are brought together. They are directly opposing each other, crushing the lens completely in half. There's no up or down movement. There's no tilting. There's no traction on the zonule. So again, any critics who think that this is dangerous, again, you can see in slow motion, there's no traction. Again, centrally directed forces, very, very safe to the zonules. Doing the same maneuver around the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the ficcative, fracturing the lens against the ficcative like you're fracturing against a cutting board or a chopping block, separating that right heminucleus in half, using some vacuum to lift that first quadrant up. I have the chopper around the lens, again, crushing the lens completely in half between the instruments, using some vacuum to grab that second fragment up, crushing the lens once again between the instruments, and at this point just using successive fracturing forces, using mechanical forces to crush the lens into smaller and smaller pieces, using ultrasonic energy and can damage the corneal endothelium. So maximizing mechanical fracturing forces means you're utilizing less ultrasonic energy, and I'm able to just use sparing amounts of pulses of ultrasonic energy as well as high vacuum to remove that lens piece. Now turning the second quadrant in front of me now, placing the chopper around the lens between the second quadrant and the rest of the lens, positioning the instruments very carefully around the lens, again, separating that. Again, it's a very sticky lens. That's what I was trying to tell you before. Very sticky, doesn't want to come out of the bag, and that's why mechanical fracturing forces are so helpful when you're dealing with a sticky lens. You can see, again, doesn't want to come up, very sticky. Again, not a plate per se, but just sticky adhesive lens material. And so by using mechanical forces, you're able to get around the lens and crush the lens and pull the lens pieces up, much more efficient and much more safe than trying to go after lens pieces with high vacuum. You never want to put the phaco tip deep in the bag and applying high vacuum. That's always a bad technique. Turning that second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip and fracturing the lens in half. Doing the same maneuver around the third quadrant. You can see how controlled that chopping of the lens is. Once I've chopped that lens, again, the chopper against the phaco tip, which the phaco tip acts like a cutting board or a chopping block, I'm able to pull that fragment up, crush the lens between the instruments into smaller pieces, and emulsify the lens piece. Same thing with that piece there. I grab it, lift it up, crushing it with opposing forces, crushing it between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens piece. This is the last quadrant, placing the chopper around the lens at the level of the equator, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, fracturing the lens in half. Doing the same maneuver around that fragment there, you can see that sudden loss of resistance. This is quite a dense lens, fracturing the lens piece in half, and then emulsifying the lens piece. Grabbing that fragment up out of the bag, crushing the lens between the instruments into smaller and smaller pieces, and then using pulses of ultrasonic energy and vacuum to remove the lens pieces. Again, by using the instruments as two choppers, that's why it's called double chop, I'm able to very efficiently fracture the lens. Even these small pieces just crush the lens between the instruments in any which direction. Again, because I'm not having to hold it with the vacuum, I can fracture the lens against the phaco tip, even off the side of the phaco tip, because again, the phaco tip is acting like a chopping block. And so that's the versatility of this technique. And this is why I think this is really the best way to disassemble the lens. You can see this epinucleus is really, really thick. Just taking my time, keeping that chopper deep in the bag, removing this thick epinuclear material here, just using some vacuum, high vacuum, and then some pulses of ultrasonic energy as needed. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and I go in with the INA handpiece. I always start subincisionally, trying to remove the cortical material from anterior to posterior. By doing it this way, you get a cleaner removal of the cortex. But of course, sometimes it doesn't come out completely cleanly like that. So you'll have to go out and start to polish. And I switch to polish mode, polishing underneath the rexus edge. And then you'll grab some cortical material along the way. You switch to cortex mode and then back to polish mode. Again, I'm polishing the lens epithelial cells, but also some kind of stray fragments of cortex. You're able to grab it and then switch to cortex mode and then back to polish mode as needed. By doing it this way, I'm able to be more confident when I remove the cortical material. Again, with polish mode, you can be very confident. You can place that tip deep into the capsular fornix. You're not going to grab the zonules. You're not going to grab the bag. You're not going to cause any major complications. The chances of PC rupture are extremely low with this polymer tip with the low flow setting. So with irrigation on, I'm going to pulse the subincisional space with a cannula with BSS, and this allows me to ensure that the subincisional capsule fornix is nice and clean. I disengage the irrigation, and then I go ahead and push the cohesive viscoelastic to fill the bag. Then I polish with the sweep. I'm polishing under the rexus edge to remove any lens epithelial cells, but also in the subincisional area. If I feel like there's a lot of lens material there, I go ahead and sweep deeper into the capsular fornix, but I can feel pretty confident that this bag is clean here. This is a fairly dense lens, and as a result, I decided to put in a 3-piece lens. I'm going to widen the incision with the blade here, and I go in with the injector, bevel down. You can see when you're widening the incision, sometimes it's still a little bit challenging to get that injector in. So I go ahead with the blade one more time, and I widen the incision. Remember, every time you try to forcefully get the injector into the incision, you're going to have potentially OVD egress. And so you have to be mindful of filling the capsular bag again as needed in these situations. So again, filling the capsular bag with more cohesive viscoelastic, holding the eye still, going in, bevel down, making sure I get in nice and easy here. Turning the bevel to the left, deliver the leading haptic into the bag. The optic opens up, rotate my hand counterclockwise so the optic comes out flat. Using the multiman to dial the trailing haptic into the bag, rotating the lens. Go in with irrigation off, activate irrigation. Going underneath the lens, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag, repositing the optic, switching to polish mode, polishing underneath the rexus edge one more time to remove the lens epithelial cells, switch to visco mode, removing all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber, and then I'll hydrate my incision. So again, this is a 3+, rather sticky lens, a dense lens. I perform double chop, cross chop mechanical fracturing techniques. Again, during the chopping maneuvers, you don't see any tilting of the lens. You're not seeing any translational movement of the lens where I'm moving it from side to side. There is essentially zero traction on the zonules with this technique. Again, you want to think of it as a poor man's my loop in the sense that the forces are directed towards the center to cut the lens. But of course, you don't need an instrument for this. And so you save money for the patient, for you, and you don't need extra instrumentation. You don't need any extra skill. You just have to use your chopper and the phaco tip, but use it in a different way, the way you've never thought of, using the phaco tip as a chopper as well as a chopping block, because you can chop the lens material with the chopper against the phaco tip from any which angle. This makes the technique so versatile, and you can use sparing amounts of ultrasonic energy and then grabbing lens pieces with high vacuum and then crushing the lens between the instruments into smaller and smaller pieces. Once the lens pieces are small enough, you can use sparing amounts of ultrasonic energy by maximizing mechanical fracturing forces to disassemble the lens and reducing the amount of ultrasonic energy. You can have clearer corneas post-op day 1, a better patient experience, more of a wow experience, again, reducing the risk for complications as a result. And this is why I feel this is the best way to do cataract surgery. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.